What stuck out to you in this cross-examination?
What stuck out to me, Steph, is that former prosecutors don't make particularly good defense attorneys. Take it from a former prosecutor. I would never pretend I could do a searing cross-examination. Why is that? Prosecutors deal with what is. Defense attorneys deal with what could have been, what might have been, what should have been. They have to be creative. They have to think outside the box when they're trying to tear down the sort of building that the prosecutors figuratively are trying to build. Todd Blanche, I don't think, did a very effective job. But, you know, the prosecutors did a great job of drawing the sting. That is, fronting all of the weaknesses in Michael Cohen, the person he is, the witness he is, because they fronted the fact that he's a liar, he's a perjurer, he's a convict, he did all these horrible things. So then when Todd Blanche started saying, well, wait a minute, Mr. Cohen, you're a liar, the jury is probably thinking to itself, the prosecutor told us all this already. I don't think Blanche was the most effective cross-examiner.
Barb, what do you think about that? I mean, this is Blanche's only second criminal trial as a defense attorney. That's almost amazing to me that Donald Trump would choose someone, even if Blanche has a great reputation, the fact that he's almost never done this specific thing.
Yeah, and I do agree with Glenn that, you know, the prosecutors tend to get a lot more practice on direct examinations, and it's defense attorneys who do more cross-examinations. I mean, you know, nonetheless, he was probably aggressive the way Trump wanted him to be. I thought that some of his aggressiveness, though, really failed to land. The way he came out of the box with the very first question was about an insult that Cohen made on TikTok about Blanche himself. And that drew an objection and a rebuke from the judge, who said, this isn't about you, Mr. Blanche. And so I thought that was a really awkward way to start, and one that really just didn't land. You know, as the prosecution has already portrayed, Michael Cohen is not a nice guy. He was, people within the Trump family and the Trump organization described many of his flaws already. And I think that, you know, it may be that they're going, instead of the targeted laser-like approach, they're going for the wear him down approach. Maybe that'll happen on day 2, but I didn't think they got in too many licks on day 1.
Carol, Michael Cohen knows where all the bodies are buried. Next to Alan Weisselberg, you got Cohen as a close number 2. If Donald Trump could do this whole thing over again, you think he would have done more to keep Cohen in the family?
Well, one of Donald Trump's absolute worst mistakes in this setting, according to Michael Cohen, was to quibble about repaying and paying Michael Cohen's legal fees while he was under investigation. Remember, Michael Cohen gets his home raided by the FBI. His wife and his children are sort of freaking out, saying, Dad, what's going on? His phone and his computer are taken. And then he stops hearing from Trump World. And there's some bickering about paying his legal fees. A lawyer whose office is right around the corner basically gets silence. And that's when Michael Cohen starts to wonder, am I on the outs? Am I no longer in? And he begins to cooperate with the feds.
Glenn, along those same lines, it is fair to say that both the civil fraud trial and this one largely happened because Cohen flipped on Trump.
Yeah. No, Cohen is important. I mean, I would go so far as to say he's an essential witness. All of the other testimony from the Peckers and the Stormy Daniels and the Keith Davidsons and the Hope Hicks and all of the corroboration by way of checks that Donald Trump was writing out of the Oval Office to reimburse Michael Cohen, the false ledger entries, the emails, the text messages, they're great. They're important, but Michael Cohen is really essential because he is the one who gets the direct admissions out of Donald Trump's mouth. And so the jury is really going to have to credit him. And I think he has been corroborated in enough ways that they were ready to accept and credit his testimony by the time he hit the stand.
Barb, let's go back to the scene that Carol just set, right? The last time Michael Cohen said he spoke to Donald Trump was 2018, after the FBI raided his home and the hotel room, and Trump called him on the phone and allegedly said, don't worry, I'm the president of the United States. Stay tough. That is a staggering quote, if true. But does it help the prosecution? Because there's the if true, his word against Trump's.
Oh, I think so. Nobody has to like Michael Cohen here, whether he's loyal to Donald Trump or he's not loyal to Donald Trump. By many accounts, he's a despicable person. But I think the way the prosecution will use that and say, you bet he's a despicable person. And he is the person that Donald Trump chose to be his fixer and worked for him closely as his personal attorney. Donald Trump was the person who chose Michael Cohen to be with him. But I think that that quote that you just gave suggests that, this was an enticement to Michael Cohen to be loyal and to work with me. And if the jury believes that that happened, I think it could suggest that then when Michael Cohen became disloyal, the opposite became true, which explains, I think, this rift between them. One of the things Todd Blanche tried to do today is to say, hey, in 2015, you said Trump was great, didn't you? And in 2016, you said Trump was great, didn't you? Yeah, that's when I was working with him. And I don't think that anymore because he abandoned me. He isolated me. And so I decided to confess to my own crimes. I decided to cooperate. And now I don't believe he's a great guy anymore.
Glenn, do you think, though, this could blow up in the prosecution's face? I mean, Todd Blanche is painting Cohen, we've all laid it out, as a thug and a liar and beyond a Trump loyalist, right? Carol and I both covered Trump back in that day, and I can tell you firsthand, Michael Cohen was impossible to deal with. He was like a human gangster shield for Trump. And by the way, he loved that gangster persona. He was desperate to be super important. He has since turned. But what if the jury only believes the first half?
You ask, could this blow up in the prosecution's face? First of all, there is no such thing as a sure win, a sure guilty verdict. Take it from somebody who had plenty of not guilty verdicts in his career. But here's the thing. I think we are all overlooking and maybe overanalyzing the fact that who benefited from all these crimes? Donald Trump. And here's the thing.
Certainly not Michael Cohen.
I told every jury, what the defense is asking you to do, ladies and gentlemen, is check your common sense at the door. No, you bring it into the jury box, and most importantly, you bring it into the deliberation room. I think those jurors are real people who are assessing, well, let's see, Donald Trump got all the benefit here and everybody else suffered all the consequences. We think he is part of this criminal conduct, and I think that common sense may help win the day.
And do you really need to believe Michael Cohen? To your great point, do you really need to believe Michael Cohen is a great guy and a truthful person to look at all of those checks written for a phony retainer agreement that clearly Michael Cohen didn't have? That is just demonstrably false. And who was signing the checks, as you pointed out, from the Oval Office starting in 2017? Donald Trump. So it sort of like strains credulity that a man, regardless of what his moral value is, regardless of how annoying he was.
Let's talk about the work he was doing.
Regardless of how bullying he was to you and me on the phone from time to time and other reporters, he confessed to crimes and went to prison for a series of events that involve this transfer of funds from Donald Trump. And there is no way there isn't a crime being committed on the other side of the ledger.
Barb, Donald Trump had another entourage of high-profile defenders at the trial today. Remember, it was extraordinary. The first few days of the trial, no one, zero, zippo, zilch, not a family member, not a friend, not a spouse. Now, it's like they're GOP all-stars. Today, the Speaker of the House had nothing better to do, nothing in D.C., but to go and sit in the courtroom with Trump. One of Trump's primary opponents, Vivek Ramaswamy, was there. Is this sort of a strategy to get closer to Trump, the Veep stakes, or is this part of a strategy to get around the gag order on Trump? He cannot go after the judge or the jurors or the judge's family, but maybe these jokers can.
Yeah, in fact, Senator Tuberville made a comment that was really quite similar. He said he was going because he wanted to take a stand against this gag order. Well, now, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that they are there to violate the gag order, that they're taking their cues or orders from Donald Trump? He is not allowed to say things. And in fact, he has been ordered not to direct others to say things. But as Michael Cohen has testified, we know what he wants us to say. He knows we know what he wants us to do. He wants us to defend him. And so it could very well be that they are there either because they see it in their own political best interest to do that. They want to help Donald Trump. They want to intimidate Michael Cohen. I don't know what it is. But today they were all in unison saying almost identical things about this trial. And so it's hard to imagine that this is just some grand coincidence that they all showed up on the same day and said the same things.